Good evening, friends, and you are watching Weekender at 5 with me, Navdeep Kaur Marwa. We'll look at the top headlines of the day. To begin with some COVID news. There have been 100 cases of COVID-19 in the community today. Out of them, 97 have been reported in Auckland and 3 in Waikato. None have been reported in Northland. 58 people are in hospital due to COVID-19. Moving on to some sports news now. Former All Black Carl Heyman has been diagnosed with dementia. Now to some other news. India, Israel, United Arab Emirates and the United States are creating a new economic forum. Lastly, a word of caution that there has been an IIT scam going on, then police has warned people against it. Keep watching indianweekender.co.nz to catch all the latest news. Welcome, Ricardo. You are with Indian Weekender. Welcome to the interview. This interview is primarily going to be about what we know about one-off residency, and Greens have been supporting little amendment in the same. So let's start with, what do you think about the one-off residency program?
Yeah, look, I mean, we fought for many months to get a program off the ground to grant residency to people here. And so while we were happy to see the government finally doing something about it, I think, unfortunately, it seems like the policy process was really rushed. And because of that, a lot of people who clearly should have been included have been left off the ground. So we're talking about healthcare workers who are on a student visa, talking about partners of temporary visa holders who meet the requirements, people who were previously in one of the qualifying visas but switched to an SSC or working holiday visa, and those who got stuck offshore who would have otherwise have met the requirements. So all of those things should have been things that the government should have thought about. If they had consulted with the community, no doubt those things would have come up. So it's a shame that we're now in a position where we're effectively fighting to have a review happening of something that we were initially really excited about.
So what do you want the government to amend right now? What are you asking the government to do?
Yeah, look, at this point in time, what we want the government to do is grant residency to people who are here and those who are offshore and have visas who would have qualified, acknowledging this is a historic one-off opportunity. And then if we're going to have a conversation about future settings, let's have those, but let's not put the lives of tens of thousands of people in the balance because we got the settings wrong. So I would say expand the eligibility criteria to include effectively all visa types who would have met those requirements, and also expand, for example, what we consider scarce and skilled, so that it's not a salary and really arbitrary list of professions, such as, I was really surprised to see horse grooming be one of those. Yeah.
I know, because I was talking to a lot of health workers who are really stressed, and MIQ workers also saying that, just because, we are on the wrong kind of visa, we are not eligible, which is causing a lot of stress, and they've been thinking of leaving New Zealand. So what do you have to say to them?
Yeah, well, that we're going to be fighting to expand the eligibility criteria, and that we absolutely hear that feedback. I mean, the thing that I found the most surprising was the response by the minister saying that for student visa holders apparently didn't have intentions of staying here, when the reality is many of the people who switched to a student visa was because they were not able to get a genuine pathway in the work visa they were in. And also acknowledging that last year during the lockdown, we told our student visa holders, hey, look, we want you to work in the front lines as essential workers. We're going to expand your work hours. And so let's make sure that what we are doing matches the reality our migrant communities went through, right? And so this is why I think expanding it is so important. And I definitely hear the hurt of MIQ workers and supermarket workers who are excluded because of the wrong visa type or because the salary isn't high enough. And that's not their fault, right? That's the fault of the industry and our other settings around employment.
If you were the immigration minister, how would you have placed this policy? What you would have done differently?
I think what I would have done is I would have made it really simple and say, look, if we're going to go big, let's get it right. Let's expand the eligibility criteria to include all visa types, and then let's have a conversation about what we want future incomers, to look like. What requirements are we expecting, and let's have that conversation. But we can't pretend and tell those tens of thousands of people that, look, don't worry, there's pathways to residency that exist when those haven't been working. There's a reason we landed in this place. It's because those settings were not working in the first place. So I would have just broadened the criteria to include all visa types. And that seems like to me that it would have met the intent the government set out, which is to give certainty to migrants and obviously employers as well. Yeah.
Do you think this new policy and the loopholes are somewhere going to impact the global image of New Zealand? A lot of students are saying you should not, advising others not to come to New Zealand.
Yeah, I mean, I do think our reputation is at stake in terms of how the broader global community sees us in respect to our immigration policies. I mean, look, for all the talk we have around how progressive we are as a country, our immigration policy can be really conservative in some spaces, including our acceptable standards of health requirements, for example. And so, yeah, it's a reputation, but to me, it's also about the livelihoods that are at stake. So, yeah, I'm concerned that we may be seen in a negative light, but I'm even more concerned about the people who feel like they're going to have to go back to their countries in debt. Who's like it's not as easy to just restart your livelihood after years of being in New Zealand. And so, I hear a lot of people from the UK and other countries saying, look, we're just going to go back and screw you, New Zealand. But for a lot of people in some other countries, it's not as simple. And so that's the thing that I'm the most concerned about right now. It's those people who are going to be impacted in the now, in the present.
And I think somewhere we have to stop people migrating to Canada or to Australia who are left out, because they are somewhere now thinking of other options. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and I've definitely heard a lot of people speak really positively about Canada and how they've put pathways to residency. Look, Canada also has some issues around migrant exploitation that need addressing. And I think to me, it's again, it's less so about the loss that we're going to incur because we're losing those skilled migrants. It's the impact that it's having on people who are having to uproot their whole lives. So yeah, look, if other countries are having far more progressive policies, we should follow suit. But to me, it's ultimately more about thinking of all those families who are going to have their lives disrupted because our government chose to not engage with stakeholders and community groups when it came to the settings of the one-off residency visa.
Right. Now, moving on, what do you have to say about the traffic light system that we're going into by this government? What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, the government's move to the traffic light system was pretty rushed and risky. What we're really clear is that setting sort of a 90% DHB target without acknowledging that some of our communities, and this includes Māori, Pacifica, and actually some of our migrant communities that have a pretty low vaccination rate among some age groups. For example, our Chinese senior citizen community has some of the lowest vaccination rates. And so what we would have liked to see is a target of 95% for those communities before we move into something like a traffic light. What I am really clear, though, is that our public health response is very separate from having, for example, an equitable MIQ system. And so I know that a lot of people are hoping that the move towards a traffic light system will mean that split migrant families will finally be able to be reunited. But I think we can both look at fixing MIQ while maintaining a really, really strong public health response and a world-leading public health response.
Right.
I mean, I come from a country where we're, I think, in the top 10 number of deaths, and we're very privileged. A lot of people don't know that reality. And I hope that people still don't get to see that reality because we took a cautious approach. But that's quite different from addressing all of the things around split migrant families, our border settings, how we distribute the allocation. Yeah.
When do you think New Zealand should be ready to open its border? When do you think, how soon that should be? Because people now are fatigued. People now really want, and other countries, they're saying that all are open. Why are we still in a kingdom where we don't know when that thing's going to open? The MIQ is very hard on some people, not getting a room.
Yeah, and I think that to me is a key thing where the Greens are really clear that MIQ allocation should be based on need, right? And we know that government can do allocations, whether it's for business expos, for entertainment and other things. So if we can do that kind of allocation for business, we should be able to do it for humanitarian issues, for families that need to be reunited. Like there's no reason why we can't have those quota systems for the people who really need it right now.
Yeah.
But in terms of when we open up and sort of get rid of MIQ and transition to something else, I think for us, the message that we've sent the government is that, look, if we're going to trial something like self-isolation for low-risk returnees, the people who should get priority in trialing that should be, again, people who have been stuck overseas, as opposed to trialing it on maybe some people that want to do some just business trips, right? I think there are some people who have been waiting for more than a year now to come back. I think those should get priority in terms of any self-isolation trials or any new trials that we do around our border cities.
Right. So you think probably next year quarter we should be ready?
Well, I think next year things may change, but it should be based on the public health advice, right? And I think if the public health advice says we're still at risk, we should still have those border settings. But what we're not saying is keep split migrant families separated, because we know that we can and should act to bring them together. For example, I'm surprised that countries like India are still considered in the very high risk
coming to that
criteria. Yeah, and so we can absolutely change how we treat people from countries like India, and also look at the fact that our border exemption settings are really discriminatory based on country of origin. And that has nothing to do with public health. I mean, that's just visa waiver country versus non-visa waiver countries. And so all of those settings are things that we should be looking at, and that doesn't compromise our public health response.
Right.
That's just about having that hard conversation of saying, why have we treated people from, say, the UK very differently from people from India when both have had a lot of COVID, and both have families and ties to people in Aotearoa.
But I come from India, and I know there was a time when India was at high risk, but that time is gone. India has proved itself, the vaccination rates, and now it is nothing to be still considered to be high risk. And that's something which I think the government should be thinking of reviewing the high risk countries.
Yeah, and I think if we're going to do a review, it should be based on genuine public health grounds, as opposed to, I guess, I would almost call it racialized decisions, because again, when other countries like the UK or the US were having record levels of infections, we never sought to impose similar levels of restrictions, right? And so if we're going to have a system where some countries are deemed high risk or otherwise, it should genuinely be based on public health settings. And again, like with vaccination and other things, we could be looking at ensuring that we're taking steps to reunite families without compromising our public health response. And again, those things are very, very different. So I think we can both be critical of the traffic light system while saying, look, more should be done to reunite families and bring Kiwis who are stuck overseas home as well.
Right, because I think the Kiwis are also getting irritated and stressed of the fact that they can't come back to their own country of citizenship. MIQ system is a debacle for a lot of people, and they're stressed, not sleeping properly, just thinking how we can come back.
Yeah, and I hear that feedback. I mean, the Greens, we actually have some of the highest, like in terms of the proportion of our vote, a lot of it comes from overseas. So we get a lot of feedback from people overseas, and that frustration is there. That's why my colleague Julianne's been working hard to make a case for, well, government should have been building purpose-built MIQ facilities since the beginning. We still have time to do it. I think it's a sensible thing to do, because the infrastructure that we build for quarantine is useful for COVID-19, but actually for any future outbreaks of a new disease that may come up, right? So we should be thinking ahead, and we should have been building purpose-built facilities. We should also be not just having a broad lottery system, because that's not equity, right? And a broad lottery system doesn't take into account that there's people with different levels of need. There's families who've been separated for ages. And so throwing everybody in a lottery system may address things like some of the bots, for example, that were plaguing the previous system, but it doesn't really address the issue of equity. And so we do want that review to acknowledge that, and it can be done.
Right. My last question would be, what are your 3 key messages to this government that they should immediately work on?
So 3 key messages to government.
Yes, that they should be currently working on. They should fix. What are the 3 things that they should fix right now?
Well, I mean, if we're going to stick to the topics we talked about, I think brought the one of eligibility, the one of residency eligibility criteria. Be very clear to our offshore community about what's going to happen to them. Look, are we going to include them? If we're going to tell them, look, we don't want you back, at least let's be honest to them. But I think some clear communications are needed. And lastly, I think with our MIQ system, we need to ensure that split families are somehow part of the plan. Let's not pretend that they don't exist or that they can simply just use the current MIQ system. We gotta allocate something for them.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Ricardo. I am completely thinking that, the government should expand the eligibility criteria. People who are here should get the chance. They should not be left out. And some of the stories are so heart-rending to know the MIQ workers crying that what wrong did we do? We served the country. We did all our best that we could. Since we are left abandoned. So I think the government should be thinking about them.
And I think we should stop using the idea that skills are just salaries, right? I mean, we said we want skilled people here, but then some of those workers who I think are really skilled and, the physical labor that they do, the way they put themselves at risk, that takes a lot of skills. There's no such thing as unskilled labor. And so let's get the settings right. Yeah. Politicians can change their minds. So there's no reason why FAFOI can look at the community feedback and change his mind as well.
I really hope the government listens to people like you and do something for the whole community. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Ricardo. It was a pleasure talking to you.